Hello, thank you for tuning into the Natural Health Rising podcast. My name is Rachel Smith. I am a certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, and I've helped hundreds of people naturally reverse symptoms of autoimmune diseases and other health challenges, from digestive issues to hormone imbalances. And in these weekly episodes, you're going to learn from myself and top health experts from around the world about functional medicine and holistic health tips to help you rise to your healthiest, happiest self. Welcome to episode 75 of the Natural Health Rising podcast. Today, I am recording this episode on October 10th, 2023, which is actually World Mental Health Day. And this is so fitting for this episode because my guest and I talk all about mastering your mental health through functional medicine, mindset shifts, therapy, nutrition, supplementation, and many other tools that we're going to dive into. I think this is an extremely important topic and episode because so many people struggle with mental health issues, which my guest today, Brendan Vermeire, likes to consider this as a mental health dysregulation, because the truth is that no matter what type of mental illness or mental health issue you or a loved one may have, it's really just the body being out of balance and dysregulated. And there are countless ways to restore balance to a point where either the mental health dysregulation goes away entirely, or it can be balanced enough to feel a massive amount of relief and for you or other people to live a more normal life. And you'll hear us talk more about that in this episode. And I can speak for this myself because growing up, I had terrible panic attacks for a very, very long time. There were times in my life where I was suicidal, many years of my life spent in deep, deep depression, most of my life dealing with extreme anxiety. And I was able to break free from all of this mental health dysregulation as I worked on my health overall, my mindset, my diet, fixing my gut health, using a variety of different therapies, and so on. And I'll never forget picking up the book. It's called A Mind of Your Own by Dr. Kelly Brogan. I picked this book up when I was about 21 years old because I was sick of struggling with my mental health issues. And that was such a pivotal moment for me reading that book and realizing that there was so much more to do for your mental health than antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications. And my guest today also has his own story of mental health challenges that he was able to overcome. And now he gets to help others do the exact same thing. And you'll hear that story today. So before I introduce my guest and dive into this enlightening conversation, I just want to share a couple reviews with you. First, I'm going to share a short podcast review from Dana Frost, who said, Rachel brings a fresh perspective to the functional lens, addressing a variety of topics. Thank you, Dana. And if you've been listening to my show for a while, or you're new and you enjoy this episode, please just take a quick minute to pause and write an honest review on whatever platform you're using in order to help boost the show so that more people can find the podcast. This is only going to help more people learn about functional medicine and holistic health and hopefully help them through their own health challenges by hearing the information that's on this podcast. And then I'm going to quickly read a review from a client that worked with me who came to me with rheumatoid arthritis and hypothyroidism so that you can see the power or hear the power of functional medicine and holistic health for yourself. So she said, I cannot say enough good things about Rachel. My life has completely changed since working with her. I was diagnosed and lived with rheumatoid arthritis and hypothyroidism. Daily tasks were excruciating. My husband had to help me with the most basic things. Every doctor I went to told me that I would have to be on immune suppressors for the rest of my life because my body was, quote unquote, attacking itself. but no one ever told me why. After working with Rachel for only 3 months, I already had life-changing results. My pain was gone. I had more mental clarity and energy. I was feeling relief from symptoms I didn't even know I had. And in addition to these great results, Rachel made the experience professional, straightforward, and I never felt alone. When I wasn't doing everything I needed to, I only got encouragement and support. You can tell she is passionate about what she does, and I'd recommend Rachel to anyone who feels stuck in their health journey, and you won't regret it. And that was from Talia Wellman of Arizona. Thank you so much for the kind words, Talia. Okay, that is all for the reviews today. And now I want you to meet today's guest. Today I have Brendan with me. Brendan is a researcher and educator that is passionate about changing the way the world views mental health. He has a background in nutrition and fitness and has over 13 years of experience in helping clients overcome their most complex health challenges. He is the creator of the Functional Mental Health Practitioner Certificate Program, the Mental Map lab test for mental health, the Neuroceuticals supplement line, and the Metabolic Solutions Research and Education Foundation. Welcome to the show, Brendan.
Thanks, Rachel. It's, as we were just saying, long overdue. Excited to be here and see what happens.
Yes, definitely. I'm super happy to have you on. So you are like really, really passionate about mental health. And we were actually just talking about all the amazing things that you've been building over the years and all kind of around this topic. And I love the work you do. I think it's incredible. But for people who don't know you, I want to go back a little bit, rewind to where this passion started. And I know you were around like 17 years old, I believe, and you have a story with some mental health dysfunction in high school, some other big health challenges and things going on later in life. So fill in the listeners on how you got to this place now.
Yeah, sure. No, I appreciate the opportunity and the kind words. And it's a really, really trippy journey. And it's like the deeper I get into this journey, it makes it harder to try to encapsulate all of it, succinctly, because I can give like these factoids, or of course everybody wants to try to put on the facade of like false vulnerability, and people get praised for it, and it's this egoic like plea for external validation, and it's not even real vulnerability, because it's like to actually tap into genuine vulnerability. I mean, that's like I have to be like tripping on psilocybin by myself to get there. So, it's not vulnerable to just go over the facts of like, yeah, 17, I was put on an SSRI, just, senior in high school, doing a physical for sports. Mentioned I just was starting to struggle with depression. I think looking back, I was kind of a high functioning depressed young man, which that's the largest growing demographic for neuropsychiatric drugs is young men. Historically, it's more, younger middle-aged women that are the greatest consumers, and now it's just exploding. And then, and I mean, there's so much there. There was the whole Navy SEAL thing where that was like my life purpose that I was going for. I signed a 6-year Navy SEAL contract at 18. Was medically discharged because I had a pre-existing injury. So then it was like my, sense of purpose and my life goal sort of got taken away from me. And that put me in a weird place, kind of displaced me, and then I was like, well, do I go try to be a college kid? And that's not, academia doesn't resonate. That's not how I learn. That's not really the life for me. So I started personal training and nutrition coaching at the gym that I, went to every day and kind of lived at, because I was always very passionate about fitness and nutrition. But then while I was very passionate and really, I'm just an obsessive personality by nature. So I was, really obsessively passionate about studying the science of exercise physiology and nutritional biochemistry, and, lab testing to identify like, why is a basic fitness nutrition plan not working for somebody? But meanwhile, I was really struggling a lot with my own mental health, and it wasn't metabolic induced, right? Like I was very metabolically, fit and healthy. So you can't blame any sort of metabolic issue there. That was psychological, psycho-emotional, neuropsychiatric. So when I was 21, I was put on a different neuropsychiatric drug. Wellbutrin, a dopamine drug instead of an SSRI. And then I was formally evaluated by a psychiatrist, clinical psychology office, and diagnosed with ADHD, major depressive disorder. And 2 weeks later, I woke up in the intensive care unit breathing out of a tube because I had chosen to overdose on the Wellbutrin. Not because I was like devastated by my diagnosis or any, bullshit like that. It was no, I actually wandered into a bad relational situation and got burnt really bad, and that was just sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. And I wish I could say that the overdose and almost dying was like the lowest point, but it was actually like the 2 years after that was easily the worst and hardest experience of my life, going through this horribly toxic, dysfunctional relationship. And she got this mysterious illness. I think she had a lot of issues, and certainly I take ownership of my contribution to that toxic dynamic. But she did. The great mystery to that whole story is she developed this mysterious illness and nobody could figure out what was wrong with her. And that's what got me into functional medicine, was trying to save her and trying to figure it out. And, I never really did. Like, we dove into methylation and MTHFR and parasites, and we did physiotherapy and chiropractic and all these kind of alternative modalities because conventional didn't have any, answers or solutions. And ultimately, the relationship failed. I managed to escape what was a very manipulative and emotionally abusive situation. And, I went on to do this. She ended up taking her life. Somehow I got to where I am. It's super trippy. So that's like the gist of it.
Wow. Thank you for sharing all that. That is a lot to move through. So I'm curious, like, what were the top lifestyle changes or tools that you used to help you get to a place where you were able to actually restore your mental health?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's interesting even to see there's like my intention with the content that I put out there for the world versus like how people receive it and what they do with it. And it's not always the same thing. Sometimes I feel like my content gets sort of like bastardized, the way that people try to consume it or use it to sort of like bend reality into their self-victimizing attempts. And it's this kind of fallacious idea of, I think people latch on to this root cause thing too much, where it's like, oh, if I can just find that one root cause, because then if I find that one root cause, and it's not me, it's not a behavioral issue, it's not a mindset issue, it's not a belief system issue or psychological issue. No. I'm basically perfect. I'm just an innocent victim. But if I can find that one root cause, because then if I find that one root cause, I can just throw some pills at it and just make it all go away. Right. I think that's what's going on. And I think a lot of that is subconscious and it's just not accurate. Right. So my whole thing, the whole intention that I have is, while that inward spiritual, esoteric, psycho-emotional journey is at times extremely hard, I think that's the hard part. Whereas simply trying to optimize your physiology, to me, that's easy. Like identifying, oh my gosh, I'm, I have celiac light and I didn't even know it, or I've got, these gut issues or liver issues, or I'm metabolically compromised. That's easy. Identifying that objectively with lab testing, taking supplements, working on nutrition, that's the easy part. The inward journey is the hard part. So as far as me, I already had the nutrition and fitness on lock. There were certain root cause factors that I didn't know were relevant to me that did help, such as optimizing my methylation and MTHFR epigenetics, or I didn't know that I was so intolerant to gluten until I strictly cut it out, or working on improving gut health or whatever. All of those helped. It just optimized my physiology further to make the harder inward journey a little bit more manageable. But a lot of it for me was like slowing down and not participating in codependent, toxic, one-sided dynamics, or learning to step into more of a spiritually sovereign place and getting more in alignment with my inner truth and the universe and everything in between. So um, the root causes can be helpful. Absolutely. That's my whole point, is to try to optimize physiology to make that inward journey easier. But at the end of the day, it is that inner work that is what saved me. And it's a continuous journey. That's the human experience, this sort of eudaimonic self-actualization pursuit. So
Okay. I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole
yeah, yeah,
here,
yeah, yeah.
but
We're just getting warmed up.
but how does one go down this journey? Like, if someone's out there listening and they're like, well, what does he mean? Like, how do I slow down? How do I become more spiritual? Like, what I know I have my own thing too. Like I had a very similar journey of this stuff. And some of it was just like picking up a bunch of spiritual books and reading them and starting to meditate all the time and just like trying a million different things until something stuck. So was there a certain path that you took?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think like the eudaimonic self-actualization journey can be boiled down to like a simple formula, or because I that's kind of something I speak out about a lot, is this sort of like self-help thing has never been bigger, right? You look at my content is more technical, science-based, root cause, objective, like this lab test, that protocol, this root cause. And that kind of content doesn't really perform well on this fucked up algorithm, that is social media. Like, what people want is they want to consume content that makes them feel less psychologically fucked up and makes them feel like there's hope for them. And like, a lot of it can be very self-indulgent, this idea that reality in the world is supposed to accommodate me. And that's not at all how it works. Like, we're all just a bunch of microbes, and basically macrobes. We're giant microbes. We're more bacteria than we are human, technically. And I think we have to surrender to this impartial reality. And that might sound nihilistic or cynical. And it's like, actually, no, that's where your freedom lies. That's where your humanity lies. Like, we did not evolve to be these like self-serving, self-indulgent, egoic organisms. But I think the ego is essentially this evolutionary mechanism to encourage this. It's like a self-interested mechanism to encourage behavior that promotes continuity, so we can contribute our gene pool and have our gene pool continue onwards. And so if you look at ego as like a survival mechanism to keep our lineage going, and then see how in this modern cushy society where all of our basic needs on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, all of those basic needs are met. So what does the ego do with itself? If the ego isn't just helping us survive, now it's freaking out about all this stuff that doesn't matter. And so my point, bringing it back to reality a little bit, you see a lot of these people trying to heal or overcome trauma or whatever. And it's like, oh, if I just read a million self-help books and every time I read a chapter, let me post it to my story, that's ego. That's external validation seeking. That's not the same thing as healing or self-discovery. So it's kind of like with working out, people that like can't go do a workout for their own benefit without like, let me document it on, Instagram. And it's like, so what's the goal? Are you trying to get to know yourself and grow as a spirit, or are you just trying to have the world praise you for like, oh, look at you, you're so special, right? So I think there's an ego dissolution that has to happen. I think a lot of people, they don't even know it, but they're living their life from a place of egoic external validation seeking behavior. And until you learn how to emancipate yourself from that addiction and actually start leading life from a place of higher self, you're just going to get stuck on that never-ending self-healing hamster wheel.
Okay, dropping truth bombs. All right. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm
Okay.
not one to like mince words, really.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We might come back to this.
Sure.
So you do one thing I do like that you say is, instead of saying mental illness, you call it like mental health dysfunction, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there are I want you to kind of identify for people, like, what are the mental illnesses, quote unquote,
Mhm.
or mental health dysfunctions that you see often with clients or are very common for people that actually are just dysfunction, and they can be maybe reversed or addressed with diet, lifestyle changes, supplements, or some of these um ego changes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like, and I'm not trying to, trigger everyone right away, because it's like I do try to actually be constructive,
Uh-huh.
with this stuff. And I think I come off differently in a podcast versus like a one-on-one client appointment, because it's like, with a one-on-one client, I'm going to nurture the shit out of them and be
Mm-hmm.
extremely, empathetic and like soft. Whereas I think I get a little bit more brazen, on these sort of free speech podcasts. But um, a great example, like, gluten is a great example, and celiac, where celiac could be considered more of a neurological disease than a gastrointestinal one, right? So if
Mm-hmm.
you have somebody, like in my experience, and I think I have a decent amount of experience, the most common symptoms of gluten intolerance are like anxiety, migraines, joint pain, brain fog.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have somebody that hypothetically is just like debilitated with, eczema and brain fog and crippling anxiety. And they might think, oh my gosh, I'm so messed up, da, da, da. And then it's like you cut gluten out of their diet, strictly 100%. And all of a sudden, like, they're experiencing far less anxiety. And now it's like, oh, I mean, while anxiety might be like a common human emotion to experience sometimes, it's not normal to have that all the time, right? Same thing
Mm-hmm.
with depression. Uh, so part of it's like, is the depression, because I'm not really one, I don't like all the diagnostic labels, and these days there's more diagnostic labels than ever, right? PTSD, like, that's not good enough. Now it's complex PTSD, or, PMS is now PMDD. And, the diagnostic labels are growing more and more. So now we get these people that are being labeled with like 5 to 10 different, so they think they have like 5 to 10 different conditions. And like, how horrible for our psyche to think like, I'm that messed up that I have, 5 to 10 neuropsychiatric disorders. So I don't like to focus on the label, because like, we all have our genetic predispositions, right? And you
Mm-hmm.
can't change your genes, but obviously you can optimize your epigenetics. So, some people might be more genetically predisposed to anxiety or depression or apathy or ADHD or whatever. But it's more about identifying those factors that are disturbing their epigenetics and how do we optimize, so a good example too would be like with obsessive compulsive disorder, which is horrible, for the record. It's, in my opinion, one of the just worst. I feel horrible for people that have it and people that have to, be around it and deal with it. And there's a lot of factors that can really exacerbate OCD, one of them being like progesterone deficiency or estrogen dominance, right? So if you have a woman who maybe they're predisposed to OCD, but then they also have, estrogen dominance or PCOS or something, where they have this grotesque absence of progesterone that balances their GABAergic activity and raging estrogen. It's not that like, okay, giving them progesterone and detoxing their estrogen, it doesn't make the OCD go away, but it'll take it from like a raging 9 to 10 and bring it down to a manageable like 2 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Same thing with like ADHD. If you have a kid with ADHD and they're put on Ritalin or Vyvanse or whatever, versus like, okay, you clean up their gut, you balance their dopamine, blah, blah, blah. What might be an out of control 9 or 10 is now a very manageable, pleasant, 2 to 3. So that's kind of the paradigm shift, which is why I like to say mental health dysfunction, not mental illness, because this idea of, I have a mental illness, that sounds perpetual. It sounds ongoing. And it's kind of like with autoimmunity. We all agree, like with autoimmunity, you could have the genetic predisposition to an autoimmune condition. That doesn't mean you have an active autoimmune condition like celiac, ulcerative colitis, where with celiac, you could have the HLA DQ2 genetic predisposition, but that doesn't mean you're actively expressing celiac. You can get it into remission. So kind of the idea being, with any mental illness, we can subdue it. We can kind of get it into a place of remission. What does it take to get there? What does it take to keep it there. And I think that's very empowering, as opposed to, oh gosh, I'm just that messed up and I need to talk to a therapist and take drugs forever and there's no hope for me.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that can't be helped?
Everything can be helped. Everything can be improved.
Okay.
And people need to change the perspective from, this blanket cure ideology to a improving functionality ideology. Autism is a great example. It's interesting to see some of the sociological ideology around autism, because I think it's becoming so prevalent, with 1 in 36 children in America being diagnosed with autism. That was just updated from 1 in 45 like a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of debate on, is it that, it's being screened for more, so now it's just being diagnosed more, so it's like falsely inflating the statistics? Possibly. Is it just more frequent now? Probably. But it's being normalized. We're seeing that obesity is being normalized. We're seeing autism is being normalized. We're sort of being propagandized to embrace this as, no, it's just normal. And how, like, don't ever speak out against it. And it's like, well, we can't have a population that is largely obese and autistic. Like, that doesn't go well for humanity if you plot out that on a trajectory as like a species trying to proliferate and survive in an impartial universe. That doesn't go well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that we're shaming or discriminating. It's that, hey, this is not healthy for a species, a population. What's driving this? And we shouldn't just embrace it as like that's normal. We should do what we can to improve upon that. So again, though, it's not about a cure, it's about improving the functionality and quality of life. And until people get that, they're sort of disempowered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. I do see that a lot of people think that they continue searching and searching and searching for like this place where they feel fully healed. And you actually talk about this on social media. I've seen you post about it. It's like, what'd you say? People become so obsessed with finding all the solutions and like this healing endpoint that actually kind of winds up backfiring, because they're so obsessive on this like end all be all healing thing.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a natural sort of like arc to that sort of journey. I think when you're really going through the shit and going through your own personal hell and crisis and whatever it is, and especially when you kind of start waking up and recognizing that nearly the vast majority of the suffering that you've experienced was self-induced. And when you start recognizing that and realizing, not all of it, right? There is such a thing as being like a true victim. Something horrible happened to you that had nothing to do with your choice or whatever. That happens.
Mm-hmm.
But the majority of human suffering is self-induced, the majority. And when you start waking up and realizing, you're kind of the master of your reality and you can shape it as you deem fit, it changes everything. And so I do think it's natural, and it's a trauma response, if you will, where you all of a sudden are becoming hyper vigilant of like, oh my gosh, that was so horrible, so I want to do everything I can. And it does go to this hyper vigilant neurotic degree.
Mm-hmm.
What we need to see, and it does happen, I think it just takes time. I think it takes time and peace and stability and consistency for years. We need that pendulum to eventually settle in the middle, where you find a balance with it. But it is very easy to get super consumed and super hyper vigilant and neurotic with this whole must heal, not good enough kind of thing. So it has to kind of be worked out of the system over time, and as the brain rewires itself.
Did you ever find yourself there at any point?
I can't say not to the degree that I see out
Okay.
there, like with a lot of the people that I consult with, whether it's practitioners or clients or both, I never did go to that place of neuroticism and hypervigilance. Did I
Mhm.
have to prioritize my health? And I didn't even back then, I didn't even think of it as like, oh, I'm self-healing, because now it's like this whole branded paradigm, that's taken over social media. Back then it was just like, gosh, I just went through a really, really hard phase of life, and I need to focus on me for a while. And now focusing on me doesn't mean like, sitting in my parents' basement and just like all about me, me, me. No, I was working my ass off. Like I was working a lot, part of which to stay busy. So I'm not sitting at home like wallowing in self-pity, right? I was
Mhm.
pouring into my education at the time. I was doing, thousands of dollars of continuing ed and certificate programs and trying to advance my career and uh elevate myself and evolve and everything. So yeah, just different. But I do see the trap, and I'm worried about, a lot of the content on social media. I think it's very seductive, and I think it kind of pulls people into that sort of hamster wheel.
Mhm. I definitely got stuck in it years ago at a certain point. I remember like thinking, "Oh my gosh, I can't go out with my friends. I can't do anything because I'm healing. I have to sleep every night. I have to do this." And yes, like if you're very sick, you should get good sleep every night and do these things. But it got to a point where I was like, wait a second. I haven't hung out with my friends in months. I haven't done things that I love in months. And that's where it gets to the point where it's like, there's a thing called balance and there's a thing called life that you need to go out and enjoy. So I think that's important for people to realize.
Yeah, I mean, life doesn't stop for you to heal, right? Like
Mhm.
you have to learn how to heal and self-care on the go while still showing up for the one life that you have, right? So, and that's not healing to like self-isolate forever, right? But again, I do think, and it's where like I do like polyvagal theory for the record. I think it's a
Mhm.
very uh enlightening and empowering model of sort of neurological, nervous system, psychological, reconstruction. Because I do, if you've been really, really hurt by whatever it is that you went through, it's going to be normal to self isolate for a while and take care of yourself for a while. But eventually it's like you got to let the light back in, and you got to step back out there, put yourself back out into the world, kind of thing.
Mhm. What are your thoughts on antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications?
Uh, I have a lot of thoughts on it. It's, I am a functional professional by nature, but I'm not anti-pharmaceutical. Am I more anti-pharma as a business model? Yes. Like, do I have
Mhm.
concerns about, the power that pharmaceutical companies have over the world? Yes, that's very disturbing to me. Uh, but as far as just, the existence of these therapeutic drugs and their efficacy, what I'm running into a lot professionally is a lot of people that, because they have this anti-pharma sentiment, they're not getting the treatment that they probably should.
Mm.
Right. I get a lot of people that like, well, I don't want to take that poison from pharma, and therapy didn't work for me. So I'm like, wait, let me get this straight. So you're unmedicated, you're not working with a professional psychologist, but you hope that I can just like snap my fingers and solve all of your problems with like probiotics and vitamins, because that sounds like a liability for me, right?
Mm.
And you're unstable, right? Makes it kind of hard to work with somebody that is unstable. So people need to make sure they are getting the treatment they need. The whole point of functional medicine is to combine the best of both worlds. Like there's a time and place for these drugs, and especially like my whole platform centers around neuroinflammation, neuroplasticity. And it's even shown like SSRIs actually can reduce neuroinflammation and promote neuroplasticity, right? So I think I can appreciate the anti-pharma sentiment. I get it. I don't like, the corruption of the big pharma business model, but that doesn't mean that we should, label all pharmaceuticals as poison or something, because often it can, they are often necessary.
Mhm.
uh some people cannot be stable functioning humans without certain pharmaceuticals. It often can be the most cost-effective and efficacious way to get better. My whole thing is I believe the greatest treatment is prevention, and the greatest medicine is to teach people how not to need it. So that's what I try to do. But I do think some people go too far with avoiding pharmaceuticals when they might really need it for a better quality of life and stability.
Okay. Yeah. I know with my clients, I definitely have people come in who have they're on a few medications, antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, whatever. And I always tell them, like, look, we're going to look at your labs. We're going to see what's going on. And if there's things that we can fix, we're going to fix them as best as we can. And then at that point, if you feel comfortable and you want to talk to your doctor and you have a plan and you want to try it, then definitely try to get off the medication. And then if that's not the route for you, like, it's also okay to stay on this if that is what works for you. But we're going to first work on all this other stuff. We're not just going to go ripping you off of medications for any kind of reason. So
Exactly, as it should be. The hope is, yeah, if you work on all that other stuff, the root cause factors, and metabolic health and psychological health and all those things, the goal is hopefully you don't need to be dependent on that drug forever. And that's kind of the big issue, which is why people are so anti-pharma, is they just feel like their doctor like brushed them off, didn't take them seriously, just threw them on all these drugs, and they're not looking out for their best interest, kind of thing. And don't get me wrong, like, it is appalling in like neuropsychiatric hospitals and units and stuff, where like they will pump children full of tons of different drugs to just like sedate the shit out of them, but they never consider something like celiac or a methylation. Like they don't consider any of that. And it is amazing what can happen when you address some of those etiological root cause factors. And at times it can make the pharmaceutical not necessary, but if it is necessary, there's nothing wrong with that, right?
Let's get into more. You've mentioned a few, but what are like the main underlying triggers for mental health dysfunction?
Yeah, so when you look at, you've got neurodevelopmental disorders, mental health disorders, and neurodegenerative conditions. And, typically people think of these as completely different things. Like, autism and Alzheimer's are like just totally different, have nothing in common, which couldn't be further from the truth. Like, when you actually look at the whole spectrum of neurodevelopmental, mental health disorders, neurodegenerative conditions, there's the same underlying physiological mechanisms that are implicated in all of them. It's just kind of, what stage of life are we in? This like early stage of life where the brain is developing? Are we in more of that, mature stage of life where the brain is just trying to maintain, homeostasis? Or are we in that later stage of life where it's longevity and anti-aging, so your brain doesn't just degenerate? The slower, we're all going to degenerate, but the rate of degeneration is very influenced by environment, lifestyle, and all these different factors. So there's a lot of components to it, but the major components are neuroendocrine dysregulation. So really just looking at all the different hormones and how that influences our central nervous system activity, whether it's steroid hormones or thyroid hormones or neurotransmitters, all of it, just neuroendocrine in general. And then there's more the immunological aspect, which is the major focal point of my body of work, with the glial system, the immune system of the brain, and the activation and polarization of the immune system of the brain largely dictates, are we in a state of homeostasis? Are we in a state of degeneration or neuroregeneration? So when you're looking at, whether it's autism research in children or Alzheimer's research in geriatrics, the major focal point from a clinical research perspective is modulating the immune system of the brain, along with kind of the third major bucket, which is neurotrophic activities. So we have all these different neurotrophin proteins like BDNF, for example, that these are neuroprotective and neuroregenerative. So this is why I really focus on neuroplasticity and neuroinflammation the most. And they're both really regulated by the glial cells, the microglia specifically, of the central nervous system. And there is kind of the psychological bucket that sort of makes everything more messy, because like physiology is pretty cut and dry. We can measure physiology. We have tons of cool biomarkers that we can qualify these things objectively. But then there's just that psychological experience, right, of how stress and human emotion, and it kind of clouds all of it. But, for example, like PTSD is a really good example where a lot of the current clinical research of, how do we as like scientists and pharmaceutical, researchers, how do we better optimize our treatment strategies for PTSD? And it's all about reducing neuroinflammation and promoting neuroplasticity. Like MDMA, maybe not the best example, but MDMA is being studied a lot for trauma specifically because of, it's an empathogenic, it has this ego dissolution effect. It makes it easier to sort of, work through that trauma and go to that place without it being really dysregulating. But MDMA is actually neurotoxic, similar to alcohol. It has a toxic effect on the brain. Like if I were to run my mental map lab test on somebody before and after MDMA, the results would look worse after the MDMA because it does cause a temporary neurotoxic effect. Whereas, some of the research that they're doing mostly in rats is using a lot of different things to reduce neuroinflammation, promote neuroplasticity, like vitamin D, or there's an antibiotic minocycline that has an anti-neuroinflammatory effect. So like, with PTSD, everybody thinks, well, trauma, and, it's all some, if I just tap and, think my way through it and feel all the feels, like I'm going to heal or something. It's like, okay, you can tap your body as much as you want, stick your finger in your ear or whatever, but that's not going to put out the fire in your brain, because when the clinical research is literally saying like, no, take this drug that turns off neuroinflammation and all of a sudden the PTSD symptoms go away. So it's like, maybe we're approaching this slightly incorrectly.
Okay. Let's go deeper into that. So if somebody has PTSD or has been through narcissistic abuse, toxic relationships, adverse childhood events, what's the order of operations? What do they do if they have this going on?
Yeah, so the two major components that I think we have to separate are more like the cellular physiological mechanistic stuff versus the behavioral and the belief systems, because it's not the same thing, but they influence one another, obviously. So the thing is, like, when you go through something that's traumatic, your nervous system's just trying to protect you, right? So you'll develop belief systems and behavioral patterns to try to cope with that. So a good example I always like to use is, if let's say you're a child, a teenager or a child or something, and you get in a car wreck with your parents, both your parents die, you get banged up, but you live, right? What a traumatic event, like truly a traumatic event. And so then you're, down the road, you're 16 years old. It's time to get your license. It's time to get some wheels, but you're traumatized from cars. You don't want anything to do with car. You don't want to get in a car. You don't want to get a driver's license. Okay, it's going to be kind of hard to get around and live life as a healthy, happy teenager if you're afraid of cars. And while, their feelings towards it are very valid because of the trauma that they experienced, it's something that has to be transcended eventually. And so from more of a behavioral perspective, nobody talks about this, but all the clinical research is about extinction learning. And extinction learning is the unlearning of false belief systems that you developed in order to cope with the traumatic event. So the idea would be, think about like a traumatized dog, a dog that's been beaten a lot, and then, it gets adopted into a new home. At first, you can't move too quick or make a loud noise, and that dog will freak out and run out of the room. It takes time. It takes compassion. It takes love, because they have to unlearn that false belief that, every time there's loud noise, I'm going to get beat, right? So it's love and compassion and patience in a safe space that the brain is able to pick up all of these input signals of, hey, not every time that I get into a car do I get in a traumatic wreck. Not every time that there's a loud noise is there a bomb going off. So it takes time to unlearn that. However, from the physiological mechanistic side of it, that requires a lot of synaptic trimming and pruning and neuroplastic remodeling in order to break down the neural networks associated with a false belief system and construct new neural networks associated with more valid, healthy belief systems. This takes a lot of remodeling of the brain. So if we have this heightened state of neuroinflammation, which can happen with a lot of trauma and other input signals, and we have impaired neurotrophic factor signaling, it makes it a lot harder and slower of a process to rewire, remodel those neural networks. So this is where it's like using different therapeutic strategies to bring down the inflammatory load in the brain while promoting more neuroplasticity. And that's why like psychedelics are, kind of all the rage for that, is kind of the main mechanism of action of psychedelics, specifically like psilocybin, LSD, is it has an anti-neuroinflammatory effect, but dramatically promotes neuroplasticity. So the point being, with minocycline, which is what they're studying a lot, an antibiotic, it's the same class of drug as doxycycline used for Lyme, but minocycline can cross the blood-brain barrier and inhibit microglial cells to decrease neuroinflammation. So for example, they'll take rats and traumatize the shit out of these rats doing different models to induce PTSD behavior, anxiety, avoidant behavior, self-isolation, all these PTSD symptoms. And they see they have activated microglial cells, more neuroinflammation, and suppressed neuroplasticity. So then when they give them a therapeutic, whether it's vitamin D or minocycline or LDN or whatever, it brings down that neuroinflammation, promotes neuroplasticity, and the symptoms improve and go away. So now the rats are being more social and acting more happy, and they're kind of living life, which then helps them learn healthier behaviors, right? So my whole thing is like, you can talk to a trauma therapist all you want to try to unpack the psycho-emotional experience and the behavioral side, the belief system side. But if you have really impaired neuroplasticity and heightened neuroinflammation, it's going to make it a very slow journey to recover.
Okay. So let me try and break this down for the listeners. So if somebody is out there and they're like, I have been fighting this battle, this mental health battle, and I myself have been through some trauma, and that's kind of been like holding them back, they should do something that starts to lower the brain inflammation, the neural inflammation, right? While also maybe having therapy. And then also, as their inflammation is lowering, they're going into the world more, and this extinction learning is also taking place. Is that?
Yeah, that's a good synopsis. So
Yes.
that's kind of
Okay.
the whole thing is like, you start with, let's try to use pills, whether that's pharmaceuticals, supplements, lifestyle change, every bit counts, right? Because so imagine this, like imagine you have somebody that's like pre-diabetic, fatty liver, leaky gut, methylation issues, leaky brain, just heightened inflammation, oxidative stress all over their body. So it's like they're metabolically ill in general, they're immunologically compromised, and then they experience a traumatic event, which just adds to this whole inflammatory burden and everything. That's a lot to undo, right? Now obviously too, like, you can't say, somebody of that phenotype and profile, well, just get a personal trainer and start eating more chicken and broccoli and it'll all go away. Like that's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
But what's one of the best ways to reduce inflammation and promote neuroplasticity? Exercise, sunlight, sleep, right? Like, so it's not all about the pills. A big part of what I do is, I pour through the pharmaceutical research, because if we know the mechanism, right, we know what's going on physiologically, and we know like, hey, this drug or this supplement or this therapeutic has this mechanism that has this efficacy and this effect. How do we reverse engineer that holistically, right? So it's those lifestyle foundations pull a lot more weight, right? So we have to optimize, the sleep and the exercise and stress management and nutrition and all of that, because that's going to have a much bigger effect on your inflammatory status, your immune status, your metabolic, your neurotrophic status, as opposed to like, we'll just put that drug in there, right? But, whatever it takes. So addressing the physiology, bring down the brain inflammation, promote neurotrophic activity. And that could be a lot of things. And I'm a big fan of using everything possible while working on the psychological, the behavioral, and the belief system side of it as well.
Okay. So you mentioned vitamin D so far, but I'm curious on what are some of the other top nutrient deficiencies or supplements that you also use to help people reduce this inflammation?
I would say zinc is probably number one.
Okay.
Zinc and vitamin D are probably like the two best studied. Doesn't mean they're the only ones, but they're probably the most extensively studied in general. Like zinc, for example, they, as in some random researchers, citation somewhere in my slides, but there was a double-blind placebo that they did where they took a cohort of depressed individuals. They used the Hamilton Depression Rating Scale. And I'm trying to remember, I think they measured like serum BDNF or something. And what they saw, they gave zinc monotherapy. So just supplemental zinc by itself, nothing else, double blind placebo. And what they saw was the zinc supplementation reduced symptoms of depression and raised serum levels of BDNF. Zinc has a lot of really amazing properties. It promotes neuroplasticity, it promotes BDNF, it modulates NMDA receptors, obviously the metallothionein system and detox and all of that. But zinc, vitamin D, omega-3s, selenium, the list goes on and on, folate, B12, a lot of B vitamins and stuff. But yeah, vitamin D and zinc are kind of the top two that have stood out the most.
Are you concerned with copper balance when it comes to supplementing with zinc?
100%. It's rare to have, like, the more common. It gets a little tricky, which is why I measure all these things on the mental map, because it's just bio-individualization. But generally speaking, for one thing, when somebody has more inflammation, it distorts the biomarkers. Copper and ceruloplasmin go up when there's inflammation. Zinc and albumin go down. So they're acute phase reactants. So when you're looking at these biomarkers that might be, elevated or depressed, you'd be tempted to assume like, oh, you have too much copper toxicity, and you don't have enough zinc, when in reality, it's those biomarkers are being skewed because of the inflammation. If you get rid of the inflammation, those biomarkers tend to normalize. So it distorts the picture a little bit. But yes, you do have to make sure copper and zinc are in a proper balance, which is why the copper zinc ratio is one of my favorite biomarkers. We want a copper to zinc ratio of like somewhere between like 1 and 1.5 or 0.75 to 1.5. 2.0 and higher is what you see a lot with like neurodegeneration. So the copper to zinc ratio is almost more of an inflammatory biomarker, not as much a nutrient biomarker. But you do see a lot of low zinc levels, a lot of high copper levels, and supplementing with zinc will raise the plasma zinc and generally reduce the copper as well. So like personally, using myself as an example, I take about 30 to 45 milligrams of supplemental zinc every day, but I also take about 2 to 3 milligrams of copper to make sure I'm keeping everything in balance. So I recommend people, for one thing, base their dosage off testing so that we can change the dose accordingly. But 2 separate supplements, one for the copper, one for the zinc. So that way you can get the dose of each just right and track it through your blood work.
Okay. You mentioned the mental map a couple times so far. Can you share a little bit more with people who don't know what that is? Because that's your test, and what exactly are you looking for, and how does that help you optimize your client's health?
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's I like it. It's pretty cool. It's a lab panel that I developed. I think I did a pretty good job with it. It's extremely comprehensive. So MAP stands for microglial activation profile. I was contracted by a medical laboratory to help with their research department and kind of advance the research of one of their core tests that they do. And that's kind of how the mental map was born. The main aspect I was really going for was qualifying neuroinflammation. What biomarkers can we use to qualify, does somebody have neuroinflammation and essentially brain degeneration? And fortunately, these days, we have so many amazing biomarkers that are at our fingertips that we can measure this stuff. Neurofilament light chain, for example, which is one of my favorite biomarkers on the panel, it's the gold standard. It's a biomarker in the blood that we can measure that's reflective of neuron damage, brain cell damage. So it's like if somebody has a concussion, they get a concussion, their neurofilament light chain in the blood goes up and up and up. If they have a neurodegenerative disorder, it goes up and up and up. So it's something that we can track that is directly related to the degeneration and damage to their brain. Like if somebody got COVID and they, have a fever and all of that, they'll have higher inflammatory markers, higher neurofilament light chain, and then we can make sure that, like, let's get you back to a healthy baseline. But the panel, the neuroinflammatory leaky brain is kind of the main focus, but we also assess, methylation and nutrient status and oxidative stress and immune function and metabolic function. So it's pretty comprehensive, and I can customize it to meet the needs of each individual. I keep changing it too. I keep like making it better and adjusting it. And with lab testing is such a bio-individualized thing, right? Doesn't make sense to run the same testing on everybody because everybody's needs are a little bit different. So, it can be customized, down to individual biomarkers, but yeah, it's pretty cool.
Amazing.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Everybody always wants to know about nutrition. And you already mentioned gluten. So
Yep.
that's a big one. But are there some top foods that you think everyone or most people should stay away from? And then also let's do some swaps here. Like what are some powerful anti-inflammatory agents that people can focus on in their diet?
Yeah. Nutrition, man. I I think nutrition's gotten way overcomplicated, right?
It's very complicated.
Back in the beginning of my career, it was like, okay, there's like keto was kind of new and starting to pick up traction, and paleo and, carb cycling, and, if it fits your macros, bro. These days, I don't know what's going on with nutrition anymore. Like, it's so over, like, I still don't understand the difference between like plant-based and vegan, and I don't really care because I think it's stupid. But like with nutrition, the whole like just eat real food kind of thing, minimally processed, it's a little bit more nuanced because like these days we have so many like clean processed foods where it's like, it's still processed, but it's minimal processing and minimal additives and fuckery, but just like eating real food and ideally sourcing it as, clean and organic and non-glyphosated and mycotoxined out and everything. There's the general food intolerances, the gluten and the dairy and soy and corn and eggs and all that. I'm a, pretty grain-free dude, strictly gluten-free. I really don't do dairy. Not that everybody has issues with dairy. And, food sensitivity testing, I think, is largely unreliable and not super helpful. So I think the best way is to really just experiment with nutrition. But the big problem you see is nutrition gets like prescribed instead of coached. And that's not how it works. Like it's behaviors, it's beliefs, it's education. So you have to develop the right nutritional habits, which requires effective nutrition coaching, not just like, hi, I'm a functional medicine person. I need you to do, autoimmune paleo, low oxalate, low histamine, low salicylate, no gluten, no dairy, minus all these foods on your food sensitivity test. That doesn't work. That's not how human nutritional behaviors work. So it takes time, it takes skill, it takes practice, takes a lot of lifestyle change, but it doesn't need to be, overly complicated. But the quality has to be there, the quantity. A lot of it's intuitive too. So, I mean, we could talk all day about nutrition.
Yeah, definitely. Last question about nutrition though. Do you work with anybody who is vegan or plant-based? And do you see any correspondence to their mood, their mental health, their lab results versus somebody who is animal-based?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't like carnivore either, for the record. Like carnivore, that's stupid. I don't know why
I'm with you. I'm right in
I
the
don't know
middle
why
as well.
people do. Like, I just the polarization, Republicans, Democrats, vegans, carnivores. I'm like, this is ridiculous, guys.
Yeah.
It's very hard, in my opinion. And look, to each their own, right? Like, I'm not the type, I'm a super chill dude. I meet people where they're at. I'm very just empathetic, education, empowerment. You do you. You're a sovereign, mature, intelligent adult, hopefully. So, but let's be objective about it, right? I have a lot of concerns about carnivore, like horrible for your microbiome, you know, why?
Mm-hmm.
You know, plant-based, like carnitine, methionine, B12, iron. I mean, believe it or not, there's a lot of nutrients we need from a lot of different food sources, and we've evolved to be able to consume a lot of things. So, but yes, you do often see a lot of deficiencies with vegan and plant-based. And carnivore is newer, but even that, we're seeing a lot of weird things in labs as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I just I just got a new client like a few days ago, and her husband decided to do carnivore, and she had no health problems at all ever. Like that's what she claims her whole life. And she thought, "Oh, I'll do it with you. That sounds fun. I'll be a supportive partner." And she did it, and like a week later, microbiome messed up, all sorts of health problems popping up. This was probably 6 or 7 months ago, hasn't been the same since. So now we're working together to undo whatever that triggered. But yeah, it's very extreme. But I want to wrap up our conversation. This has been amazing. I know we're coming up on time here. Do you have I want to do a speed round. It'll be really quick, I promise. But do you have
Sure.
any final statements or things that you feel like we didn't get to?
I think my whole thing, I hope your audience doesn't think I'm a total prick, because like I think some of the stuff that we've gotten into is important, right? I really do. And I just posted, I think yesterday, I repost some of my stuff that I think is worth, reposting. And I think we have to be objective. I think we have to own our shit, not project it. I think we need to check our egos a lot. Like, why are we really doing what we're doing? Is it external validation seeking, or is this eudaimonic self-actualization oriented? But the big thing for me is like, I just can't stand the trends, the bandwagon trends that social media drives. And it's the most, I don't know, just like asinine, seductive, egoic clickbait bullshit. And everybody's just trying to jump on the trend as a quick fix. And it's like, I think any rational, well-adjusted human knows that there's not a quick fix for, chronic health issues or whatever. And being objective with it, where, instead of just like randomly throwing spaghetti at the wall, hoping something sticks, of, well, maybe if I do a parasite cleanse every full moon, or if I just jump on this carnivore bandwagon or whatever, it's like, how about consistency with foundational habits that have fueled human evolution for 300,000 years? And then, like, what, humans are like 99.8% genetically identical. Like, do you really think like you're such a special snowflake that you just need something totally different? We're all more similar than not. So maybe we should all be doing more of the same general principles. And then once you have a good foundation, if you want to customize it to your own liking, go for it. But also being objective with, base it off lab testing, objective, clinically validated lab testing, not somebody pushed on my arm and told me I had a stealth infection, or this one influencer promotes that diet. Like, come on, guys. Like, let's be like evidence-based and rational and scientific and intuitive at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Are
Cool.
you open to a speed round? It'll be 5
Yeah,
fast questions.
let's
Okay.
do it.
What is one supplement you cannot live without?
Serum bovine immunoglobulins all day.
What's your favorite thing to do for stress reduction?
Workout and sex.
If you were on a deserted island, what 3 things would you bring with you?
Uh, endless supply of multivitamins. Probably, a knife, and I don't know, a bunch of psilocybin, so I can just like explore my consciousness until I waste away.
Okay. Awesome. Your what is one of the most impactful books that you've read?
Oh gosh, honestly, the Four Agreements, like, you can't go wrong.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yes. What is it? Miguel Ruiz, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And finally, if you could leave the listeners with one tip that they could implement this week to help them live a healthier, happier life, what would that be?
Mm. uh Nothing has anything to do with anybody but self. So look inwards. stop looking outwards, stop pulling for external validation, start tuning in, looking inwards, and yeah, I don't know, slow down, see where that takes you.
Mm-hmm. Well, good stuff. Thank you so much for being on. Share where people can find you. And then also I'd love for you to share how people can support your research for mental health as well.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I'm not hard to find. It's Holistic Savage on Instagram. It's just my main platform. We do have a website, but websites are kind of irrelevant these days. But the link tree, the link in my bio, that's everything that I have to offer the world can be found there. But yeah, people can support my research by, buying a t-shirt. I'm trying to sell 10,000 tank tops, t-shirts. It's not going so great so far. But yeah, I have a lot of other fundraising efforts I plan on doing in time, but we're trying to raise like $100,000 so we can actually do a clinical research project. I'm talking to a biotechnology company right now, but yeah, I mean, until I raise some funds, I can't really do the research I want to do. So sporting a shirt would be, helpful. And I really appreciate that you just asked that. And thank you very much for having me. I think this was long overdue, and I'll be looking forward to doing it again on my podcast.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. Thank you so much, Brendan.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like this video and comment, letting me know what you enjoyed and what you want to see more of. Also, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you get alerts when new content is coming out and you don't miss any videos. And just a quick reminder that this information is for educational and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any illness or medical condition. Please consult with a qualified healthcare professional before making any changes to your diet, exercise routine, supplements, or medical treatment. If you're looking for a functional medicine practitioner, please reach out to me. And thank you again for watching, and keep striving to become your healthiest, happiest self.